Welcome to Puzzles and Solutions. Today I'll be going through MatrixB from Nicologic. The test has 22 puzzles in total and you have a time limit of 30 minutes to complete them. As always, I will leave the link down below in the description. And if you're just following along the video, I suggest that you pause at the start of every puzzle and try them yourself before listening to my solution. Let's start solving the puzzles. Puzzle number 1. This is the first puzzle of the test. Let's start by ignoring the colors and focus on what side the color is on. In the first row, the front side is colored. In the second row, the top side is colored. And in the third row, the right side is colored. This means that the answer should only have boxes with the right side colored. If we look at answer A and B, the bottom left box has color on the wrong side. So we can eliminate these two answers. Now, adding the color back in, I want to focus only on the color itself and not what side it's on. So I will just color all the sides of the box in the same color. Now, if we look at the diagonals from top left to bottom right, we can see that there is a clear repetition of color in each of the diagonals. In the main diagonal where the answer is in, there is a repetition of red on top, blue on bottom left, and green on bottom right. This description matches answer F. Answer F is the correct solution. Puzzle number 2. Let's start by focusing on the shape in the top of the first picture, in the bottom of the second picture, and in the top of the third picture. In the first row, we have that 2 rectangles plus 1 rectangle equals 3 rectangles. In the second row, we have that 1 rectangle plus 1 rectangle equals 2 rectangles. And in the third row, we have that 3 triangles plus 0 triangles equals 3 triangles. Out of the 6 answers, only answer A, C, and E have 3 triangles on the top, so we can eliminate the other answers. To find out which one of these 3 answers is correct, we add back the rest of the shapes and focus on the bottom of the first picture, the top of the second picture, and the bottom of the third picture. In the first row, we have that 1 circle minus 1 circle equals 0 circles. In the second row, we have that 2 circles minus 0 circles equals 2 circles. And in the third row, we have that 3 squares minus 3 squares equals 0 squares. Answer A has 0 squares. Answer A is the correct solution. Puzzle number 3. Starting off this puzzle, I want to focus only on the first row. Here we can clearly see that we're just adding the first picture on top of the second picture to produce the third picture. In the second row, we can't just add the first and the second picture. We have to add them together and then move every shape in one position in counterclockwise direction. Looking at the bigger picture, we see that we have 0 rotation in the first row, 1 position counterclockwise rotation in the second row. So it makes sense that we have 2 position counterclockwise rotation in the third row. So in the third row, we add the first and the second picture, and then we move every picture in one position in counterclockwise direction twice. So once and twice. If we look at the answers, this picture matches answer B. Answer B is the correct solution. Puzzle number 4. If we look at the diagonals from top left to bottom right, there is a repetition of shape. In the gray diagonal, there is a repetition of ellipses. In the purple diagonal, there is a repetition of halfway between an ellipse and a rectangle. And in the gold diagonal, which the answer is in, there is a repetition of rectangles. Answer D and F does not feature rectangles, so we can eliminate these 2 answers. Next, I want to focus on these black lines, which are in some of the shapes. If we focus on these shapes, we can see an easy pattern. In the first row, we have a black line in the smallest shape. In the second row, we have a black line in the medium shape. And in the third row, we have a black line in the biggest shape. Answer B has a black line in a medium shape, so we can eliminate it as a possibility. The pattern to pick between A, C, or E can also be found in the diagonals from top left to bottom right. If you focus on the main diagonal, we see that every shape moves in one position towards the right as we move downwards in the diagonal. This leads to answer A being the correct solution. Puzzle number 5. This is a row puzzle where the second column describes an action. Each of the pictures in the second column describes a line of mirroring. The line goes through the center of the circle and passes only through a green area. In the first row, the line of mirroring is from the top right to bottom left. In the second row, the line of mirroring is a horizontal line. And in the third row, the line of mirroring is from top left to bottom right. So in any row, to go from the first to the third picture, we simply mirror each of the sides of the line of mirroring to the other side. So for example, in the second row, the top left is mirrored to the bottom left is mirrored to the top left, The top right is mirrored to the bottom right, and the bottom right is mirrored to the top right. To find the correct answer, we have to look at the third row. The red side on the top right will be mirrored to the bottom left, and the blue side will stay on the bottom right. Answer E is the correct solution. Puzzle number 6. For this puzzle, we can simply ignore the color inside the squares because it's not required to solve the puzzle. Let's first focus on the blue circles. In the first row, going from picture 1 to picture 2, the blue circle moves in 1, 2, 3, 4 positions in clockwise direction. And going from picture 2 to picture 3, the blue circle moves in 1, 2, 3, 4 positions in clockwise direction. In the second row, we have the exact same scenario. The blue circle moves in 1, 2, 3, 4 positions in clockwise direction. And again from picture 2 to picture 3, we move in 4 positions in clockwise direction. To find out where the blue circle should be in the answer, we have to focus on the third row. From picture 1 to picture 2, we have 4 positions in clockwise direction, and doing the same from the second picture to the answer, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 positions in a clockwise direction. So the blue circle ends up in the bottom right of the grid. This only matches answer B and D, so we can eliminate the other answers. For the red circles, it's a bit easier. The red circles are simply an addition with cancellation. For example, if you go by the first row, in the two first pictures, we have these two red circles in common, and these two red circles not in common. So when we add the two first pictures together, the two black circles cancel out, while the two green circles are carried over to the third picture. To solve the puzzle, we do this for the third row. We have these 4 circles in common, and this one circle in the right bottom not in common. This matches answer D. Answer D is the correct solution. Puzzle number 7. First, let's just ignore the color and focus on how the squares move. If we look at the first row, going from picture 1 to picture 2, we simply move the squares once towards the right. The square in the top right moves outside the grid and reappears on the left side. Going from the second to the third picture, we have the exact same movement once towards the right, and the two squares which are on the bottom right moves outside the grid and reappears on the left side. Next, we have the color component of the puzzle. If you focus on what color red becomes after moving to the right, we see that it becomes gray. So red leads to gray. Next, let's focus on what color the gray squares become after moving to the right. We see that gray leads to blue. And finally, focusing on the blue, we see that blue leads to red. To solve the puzzle, let's focus on the third row. The second picture has a gray square in the top left, and moving it once towards the right will lead to a blue square in the top middle. This does not match answer A and D, so we can eliminate these two answers. Next, let's focus on the blue square in the bottom left. Moving it once towards the right and turning it red will lead to a red square in the bottom middle. This does not match answer B and C, so we can eliminate these two answers. And finally, in the second picture in the bottom middle, we have a gray square, which will move once towards the right and become blue, which leads to a blue square in the bottom right of the answer. This does not match answer F, so we can eliminate answer F. Answer E is the correct solution. Puzzle number 8. This puzzle is very similar to puzzle 5. They are both row puzzles which have an action described in the second column. Let's start by focusing on the shapes which are affected by the blue action. In the first and the second row, we can see that the shapes in the blue positions are simply swapped. If we look at the third row, in the first picture we have a flag in the top left and an eclipse in the top right. This means that the answer will have an eclipse in the top left and a flag in the top right. This matches only answer A, C, and D, so we can eliminate the other answers. Next, let's focus on the rest of the puzzle. We can see that the red action is rotating the shape by 180 degrees. The green action is rotating the shape by 90 degrees clockwise. And the orange action is to add the shape with the shape to the right of it. If we focus on the bottom left of the answers, we see that every bottom left shape is the same. And we would get the shape by first rotating the bottom left shape 90 degrees clockwise and then adding it with the shape to the right of it. This means that in a position where there are two actions, then the top left action is performed before the bottom right action. So in the bottom right of the first picture, we see that at first it's pointing towards the top left. Rotating it by 90 degrees clockwise will make it point towards the top right. And then rotating it by 180 degrees will make it point towards the bottom left, which we can see in answer D. Answer D is the correct solution. Puzzle number 9. I wasn't able to solve this puzzle, but I found some indications that answer B is correct. But after checking which answer is correct, I found out that answer D is the officially correct solution. I would appreciate any comment explaining this puzzle, and I will make your explanation into a separate video if it's good enough. Okay, let's move on to the next puzzle. Puzzle number 10. Going by the first row, we simply add together the two first pictures and then rotate it by 90 degrees clockwise. Going by the second row, we add the two first pictures together and then we rotate it by 90 degrees clockwise. To solve the puzzle, we go by the third row. We see that the first and second picture have these two squares in common. So when we add them, we don't know what happens. It might cancel out, it might stay red, it might turn blue. Now, since we don't know what happens when we add two red squares together, we can simply ignore that information for now. Rotating it by 90 degrees clockwise gives this pattern. Now, if you compare this picture to the answers, we see that answer A cannot be correct because it has a blue square in the bottom left. Answer B cannot be correct because it has a blue square in the bottom left. Answer D cannot be correct because it doesn't have a red square in the middle left. And finally, answer F cannot be correct because it doesn't have a blue square in the bottom right. So everything matches between this picture and answer C and E. But remember, we still have these two squares, which are the product of adding two red squares together. If we look at answer C, it has a different color in the middle right and the bottom middle, so it cannot be the product of the same addition. This leaves answer E as the correct solution. Puzzle number 11. This is another puzzle with a lot of redundant information. All these small shapes are not needed to solve the puzzle, so we can just remove them. In the top left to bottom right diagonals, we have a repetition of shapes. We have rectangles in this diagonal, triangles in this diagonal, and ellipses in the main diagonal where the answer is in. These ellipses can only be found in answer B and C, so we can eliminate the other answers. Next, let's focus on the diagonals from top right to bottom left. We have rectangles in this diagonal, ellipses in this diagonal, and triangles in this diagonal where the answer is in. We can find this triangle in answer B. Answer B is the correct solution. Puzzle number 12. This is another puzzle where we have actions described in the second column. Let's start by focusing on the red action. In the first and second row, we see that the blue tiles are swapped for white tiles and the white tiles are swapped for blue tiles. If you follow this logic in the third row, we see that we would have a blue tile in the top right and the rest would be white, which only matches answer C. Answer C is the correct solution. Adding the rest back in and focusing on the yellow action, we can see that every tile moves in one position in clockwise direction. This also matches answer C. Puzzle number 13. Looking at the first row and focusing on the squares, we see that the squares moves in one position in clockwise direction. Also notice that the line in the squares always points towards the center of this 2x2 grid. In the second row, we have these squares, which also moves in a clockwise pattern, and the lines always points towards the center of the grid. In the third row, we have these two squares. Notice that the squares here are moving in a counterclockwise pattern and not in a clockwise pattern. Also, the lines always point towards the center of the grid. If we look at the second picture, it has a square in the top left, and moving it once in counterclockwise direction will lead to a square in the bottom left of the answer, which we can see in all the answers, but the line has to point towards the center of the grid, which we can only see in answer C, E, and F, so we can eliminate the other answers. Moving on from the squares, we see that each tile in the answers have these lines in the top left. I'll use the first row as an example to explain the lines. Going from the first to the second picture, this circle in the top right moves to the left, and this movement leaves behind a line in the tile which it moved from. Going from the second to the third picture, the circle in the top left moves downwards, and this movement leaves behind a line in the tile which it moved from. Also notice that the line in the second picture is carried over to the third picture. So looking at the third row, we see that the second picture has these two lines on the bottom left. Also, we have two circles, one in the top left and one in the bottom right, which both moves to the top right and leaves behind one line each. So the answer should have one line in the top left, one line in the bottom right, and two lines in the bottom left. This does not match answer E, so we can eliminate answer E. The only difference between answer C and answer F are these two circles in the top right. Either they should be aligned by this line which points towards the center of the grid, or perpendicular to that. If you look at the first picture in the third row, we see that the circles in the bottom left are aligned by a perpendicular line. So therefore answer F fits this pattern, and answer F is the correct solution. Puzzle number 14. To explain this puzzle, let's use the first row as an example. All the blue squares move one tile towards the right. The blue squares on top and bottom moves under these yellow squares, while the blue square in the middle is still visible. Going from the second to the third picture, all the blue squares moves one tile towards the right. Note that the square in the top right of picture 3 is now red because when a blue square moves under a yellow square, it becomes red. The blue square in the right middle moves to the right and leaves the 3x3 grid and reappears on the row below all the way to the left. And the blue square in the bottom right does exactly the same. It moves to the right. There is no right to move to, so it reappears on the row below all the way to the left. Now there is no row below, so instead it reappears in the first row. Also note that this square was blue, but since it moved under the yellow square, it became red. Also, I want you to look at the top middle of the second row. In the top middle of the first picture, we have a red square, which moves to the right under this yellow square. And going from the second to the third picture, this red square is in the top right. It moves to the right. There is no right to move to, so it reappears on the left of the row below. Now notice that in the third picture, there is a blue square in this position, meaning that when red squares moves under yellow squares, they become blue. To solve the puzzle, let's look at the third row. Going from the first to the second picture, we have these 4 squares moving to the right. This leads to a red square in the top left of the second picture. Now notice that when it moves to the right, it moves under a yellow square, so it's irrelevant for the answers. This leaves these 3 relevant squares. The square in the top middle was blue, so it will become a red square in the top right. The square in the middle right was red, so it will become a blue square in the bottom left. And finally, the square in the bottom middle was blue, so it will become a red square in the bottom right. This matches answer E. Answer E is the correct solution. Puzzle number 15. I found this puzzle quite enjoyable. Let's start by removing the answers. Going by the first row, we take the first arrow and add the second arrow on the tip of that arrow. Then we take the third arrow and add it on the tip of the second arrow. This will lead to all the arrows pointing to the start of the next arrow. Going by the second row, we take the first arrow, add the second arrow, and then the third arrow. Note that the blue arrow doesn't reach perfectly to the start of the red arrow, but I think this is due to bad graphic design. And finally, going by the third row, we take the first arrow and then we add the second arrow. Let's save this picture and then add back the answers. We see that the answer has to be a short arrow pointing from the right towards the left, which only matches answer A and D. To find out which one of these are correct, we have to figure out these lines which are on the arrows. If we look at the first row, we see that 2 equals 1 plus 1. So blue equals red plus green. In the second row, we see that 2 plus 1 equals 3. So blue equals red plus green. Going by the third row, we will have blue equals red plus green. So 2 equals red plus 1, meaning that red equals 2 minus 1, equaling 1. And therefore answer A is correct. Puzzle number 16. In the first row, going from the first to the second picture, we just move every shape in a clockwise pattern in one position. The same thing goes from moving from the second to the third picture. In the second row, we see that there is no movement, but all the shapes are rotated by 90 degrees clockwise. And finally, in the third row, we have a combination of the change in the first and the second row. First, we move the shapes in a clockwise pattern, and then we rotate them by 90 degrees clockwise. To find the correct solution, we have to do this for the second picture. This leads to a red shape in the bottom left, which we can't see in answer E, so we can eliminate answer E. Also a blue shape in the top right, which we can't see in answer D, so we can eliminate it. The 4 answers left all have the positions right, but the rotation part is different for the answers. The red shape in the bottom left should be facing towards the center, which is not the case for answer C, so we can eliminate answer C. The green shape in the top left should be pointing towards the top left, which is not the case for answer A, so we can eliminate answer A. And finally, the blue shape in the top right should be facing downwards, so we can eliminate answer B. Answer F is the correct solution. Puzzle number 17. There are many ways to solve this puzzle, but my favorite is to look at the diagonals from top right to bottom left. Let's start by looking at the red diagonal. So moving downwards in this diagonal, we see that the blue line moves in one position towards the right, while the red square moves in one position towards the left. In the yellow diagonal, we have the exact same thing. The line moves in one position towards the right, while the square moves in one position towards the left. To solve the puzzle, we go by the blue diagonal, where we have the same pattern between the pictures. If we look at the second picture, it has a yellow line in the center, which will move to the middle right, and a blue line in the top left, which will move left and reappear in the bottom right. So blue square in the bottom right, while yellow line in the middle right. Answer B is the correct solution. Puzzle number 18. This is another puzzle where we have this 3x3 grid and we have a movement towards the right. For example, if you look at the two first pictures, the first column moves once towards the right and becomes the second column in the second picture. Now notice that the second column of the second picture is in different colors than the first column of the first picture, and this is because there is also this color change. Red becomes yellow, yellow becomes blue, and the blue becomes red. There is one further thing to explain about this puzzle: what happens to the third column when it moves towards the right. The top right square moves to the right and reappears on the left side of the row below. The middle right square moves to the right and reappears on the left side of the row below. And finally, the bottom right square moves to the right and reappears on the left side of the row below, but there is no row below, so instead it reappears in the first row. If you're a bit confused about this movement, just think of each tile in this 3x3 grid as a number from 1 to 9. The first row is 1, 2, 3, the second row is 4, 5, 6, and the third row is 7, 8, 9. The squares always moves to the next number in the line, and also after 9 comes 1 and not 10. To solve this puzzle, let's focus on the second picture in the third row. These 4 squares can be used to solve the puzzle, so let's just ignore the other squares. First, the red square in the middle right moves to the right and becomes a yellow square in the bottom left. This does not match answer E, so we can eliminate answer E. Next, we have these 3 yellow squares which moves once towards the right and becomes blue, as you can see in answer B. Answer B is the correct solution. Puzzle number 19. Starting off this puzzle, let's focus on the first row. Going from the first to the second picture, the top left and top right shape is exchanged. And going from the second to the third picture, the top right and middle shape is exchanged. In the second row, going from the first to the second picture, the top left and middle shape is exchanged. And then the top right and the bottom left shape is exchanged. In the third row, going from the first to the second picture, the top left and the bottom left shape is exchanged. Now I want you to ask yourself what shapes should be exchanged as you go from the second picture to the answer. If you look at the previous exchanges, there is no clear pattern of what shapes should be exchanged. So to answer the question, we don't know what shapes should be exchanged. Let's focus only on the second picture and the answer, and dye every shape in red. Now all the shapes which are identical in the answers as in the second picture, I will keep in red, and I will dye all the other shapes in blue. Answer A and B have 3 shapes moved, answer C has 2 shapes moved, answer D and E have 4 shapes moved, and answer F has 0 shapes moved. Of course, an exchange of 2 shapes would only move 2 shapes, so therefore answer C is correct. Puzzle number 20. For this puzzle, let's just ignore the second column. We can see that the third picture in a row is simply the first picture rotated by 180 degrees. Going by the third row and rotating the first picture by 180 degrees, we get answer D. Answer D is the correct solution. Now answer D is the officially correct answer, and we achieved it by using this method, but if I add the second column back in, then the third row doesn't make any sense. Here I color coded each of the shapes. The red shapes are rotated by 90 degrees clockwise, the blue shapes are rotated by 90 degrees counterclockwise, and if you look at the third row, the black circle in the top left doesn't move at all, while the yellow shapes are rotated by 180 degrees. So the problem is that in the third row, if we go from the first picture to the third picture, then the black circle in the top left should stay in the top left, while the rest of the shapes should rotate by 360 degrees, which means that the answer should be identical to the first picture. But we already know that this is not the case, since answer D is the correct solution. This means that this puzzle is flawed, and more specifically, the second picture in the third row is flawed. Puzzle number 21. This is a puzzle which can be solved on the diagonals from top right to bottom left. Moving downwards in this diagonal, we can see a 90 degree clockwise rotation followed by a color change. Red changes to blue, blue changes to yellow, and yellow changes to red. Next, looking at the yellow diagonal, we have the exact same color change and rotation. So to solve the puzzle, we look at the blue diagonal and we base ourselves on the second picture. Rotating it and changing yellow to red and blue to yellow, we get a picture identical to answer C. Answer C is the correct solution. Puzzle number 22. This is the second puzzle of the test, which I have no idea how to solve. If you understand this puzzle, please comment down below and I will turn your explanation into a separate video. The officially correct answer though is answer B. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video and I will see you again in the next puzzle.